Okay, so first news story of the week, an exclusive that came from Jez Corden, Windows Central. Apparently, Microsoft is establishing a game preservation slash future compatibility team. And yeah, interesting sort of choice of phrasing there. And, if you go to look at the Windows Central article, there's actual comments from Sarah Bond, chief of Xbox, about what's actually going to be happening with this team. And essentially, well, they formed a new team dedicated to game preservation, which they say is important to all of us at Xbox and the industry itself. And yeah, I can attest to that because, John, Alex, and I spoke to Phil Spencer at Gamescom precisely about this topic. Building on our strong history of delivering backwards compatibility to our players, and we remain committed to bringing forward the amazing library of Xbox games for future generations of players to enjoy. I'm going to go to you first of all, Oliver, on this because, well, actually, no, let's talk about some supporter questions first of all. Hi, guys. I've noticed that Microsoft are at it again with backwards compatibility and was wondering what your thoughts on the subject. What your thoughts are on the subject. Are there any titles you'd hope to see in the next batch of games? That's from Mr. Bespoke. This one from Stefan ST. Hi guys, I'm surprised by the news that Microsoft formed a new team for game preservation. I thought Microsoft already had a team since the Xbox One days, establishing 360 and Xbox OG back compat. We know that this work stopped at some point, but what happened since then? And this one from Johnny_5A. Microsoft's preservation team sounds a lot like the back compat team that got closed up before the series console's launch. I think it actually persisted beyond that. Mm-hmm. Is it the same idea, or is there some key difference in approach? Would be great if they'd figure out how to handle the orphan games whose rights are now in limbo. It does kind of sound a bit like that, but with a twist, right, Oliver?
Yeah, my guess would basically be that the existing Microsoft backwards compatibility team was working on backwards compatible games for Xbox consoles, and this is going to be broader. Because just reading through the lines here, we know that the next console might not be a full AMD box. We know that Microsoft is taking explorations into possibly doing something with Windows, doing something with Xbox, combining those two in some sense. And we know that they were exploring an ARM CPU design. So the fact that they're making this much noise about game preservation, to me, probably adds more fuel to the fire that this won't be a traditional AMD console box, and then it might be something broader, something else, something with potentially more hardware SKUs in the mix. Because in that case, achieving backwards compatibility would be hard, and if it's just an AMD box, achieving backwards compatibility should be relatively trivial, at least with their existing library of titles, or it should be relatively easy. And I think Microsoft has done a better job than other platform holders with backwards compatibility by like a good margin, because a ton of 360 titles are playable on Xbox One, ton of, and all those are carried over to Xbox Series, obviously. Mm-hmm. And those all have enhancements, or many of them have enhancements. Certainly all of them have a more stable frame rate, generally speaking, but like you get 4K resolution on some titles, 60 FPS on some titles with both, like Final Fantasy 13-2, which is just fantastic on Xbox Series. You get a 3 times resolution boost there. You get 60 FPS rendering. It's like the best way to play that game. The only pain point here that I think about just looking at this kind of announcement and where I think they'll go with it is that it probably does only apply to digital purchases. Speaking for John here, because they don't have a commitment to physical media. Obviously, Xbox Adorably All Digital doesn't have a disk drive, and probably their next console won't either. Maybe they'll have some accommodation for disk drive owners down the line, but yeah, that's the only thing that to me is like a little bit of a thorn in these kinds of announcements, is the idea that like, yeah, you won't be able to keep your entire library of 360 digital titles with you, but maybe you'll have, or rather 360 physical titles, but maybe you'll have some accommodation for those digital titles.
Alex?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with everything Oliver said. I actually do think the specific wording of saying game preservation, which talks about game preservation is going far beyond like backwards compatibility. That's a different wording altogether. And I think it's very purposeful, because I actually almost think of like generalized emulation at that point when I think of phrases like that. And future compatibility is basically the problem of, okay, so we have the current box. How do we get the things from the current box to run on the future box? And the fact that it needs to be problematized to the point where they need an entire team dedicated to this, it really does actually say to me, and I think it says to a lot of people, that the next Xbox is going to be different enough on either a hardware or software level that it requires an entire team dedicated to try and make it work. And they'll make it work. I mean, it's Microsoft. They're going to make it work. It's just a matter of like, what does it actually look like in the end? And I'm very curious about the physical proposition, because when Oliver was talking about that, I actually thought about how actually when Steam started, there was an initiative to register your games that you had physically with Steam. I did it with Doom 3 and with Half-Life 2, I believe. Or was it? No, I didn't do it with Half-Life 2. I did it with Doom 3, but basically you could input like a CD key into Steam and it would activate the product there. It existed actually for a number of games up until like midway through like Steam's lifespan in like 2010 to 2011. And this was a way that you could transfer partially some aspects of your library of those publishers that had agreements with Steam into the digital space. And I'm curious if there's a way that Microsoft could leverage that with Xbox Series X owners, for example, or some other method, for example, where you could take a physical game and turn it into a digital copy. I'm very curious if they could do something like that. But I'm just so curious about what this next Xbox is, because yeah, you don't need this if it's going to be that plain old AMD grab bag. So what is it? I want to know, Microsoft.
Yeah. Well, we've been talking about this for some time, but there is a move to produce ARM-based Windows laptops, and there's a Qualcomm chip coming soon that does just that. There's been footage of it running Baldur's Gate at 1080p 30,
right?
Which for a low-power device would be pretty remarkable. So there is going to be some sort of x86, x64 to ARM sort of conversion layer going on there. And I guess they could leverage that work if they're going to move across to ARM. And I do think at some point it's going to make a lot of sense to do that, right? In terms of transistor counts, in terms of efficiency, all of this stuff is great for a console and you'd want to leverage it. It also opens the door to other vendors, right? Because, if you're able to produce Windows experience or maybe even an Xbox experience on ARM, then, suddenly NVIDIA enters the fray. They're locked out of console SoCs as monolithic designs at the moment because they don't have an x86 license. So, we could well be seeing Windows laptops that are entirely NVIDIA based, which would be quite intriguing and, perhaps opens the door to something happening on Xbox. The difference there is that we seem to be talking about sort of low-end devices at the moment with the Qualcomm chip. But here we're talking about what Microsoft is describing as the greatest generational leap ever. Words to that effect. Something which we can talk about later. The game preservation side of things and the back compat team. I mean, there are titles, maybe even ABK, Activision Blizzard King titles that should be on Xbox but can't be at the moment because they're kind of locked to 360 and maybe even OG Xbox. So just having a team to finish up the job there, so to speak, would be great. I was actually just did a bit of Googling on Singularity, which is a game I have quite a amount of affection for. It's not backwards compatible as I understand
That's
it right
weird.
now. That would so suddenly Microsoft is got this huge range of games that you'd kind of want to have on Xbox, right? I mean, they own them now, so why not? Unless there's some sort of arcane licensing rights. So there's a lot for this team to do, and I am still intrigued by this whole concept of a potential dovetailing of sorts between console and PC, because I think Phil is on the record, and he mentioned to us at Gamescom that PC is basically a great platform for game preservation, right? Because it's where everything is, and you're kind of not locked to specific console hardware and backwards compatibility issues. It's just there, and this the Xbox is obviously essentially a slimmed down PC, so why not? Interesting stuff. I mean, it's great that this team is back in existence, assuming it went away at some point,
Yeah, it's more like we just didn't hear anything about it for so long that we just assumed, right, that it was gone.
what's really exciting about this is just Microsoft's track record on this stuff. Basically, what they did in bringing PowerPC CPU code to x86 with 360 back compat is, I think it's one of the highlights of any console generation. When that announcement was made at E3, it was like, no way. There were rumblings. There was even a leak from Microsoft saying, yeah, we're working on this. But nobody could quite believe it because it didn't quite seem plausible. And then it happened, and it had some issues, but then it got better and better and better and better. And this is kind of, you apply that moving forward to new hardware. Wow. And I think the future's safe with Xbox in terms of continuing that generational support for all of those different Xboxes onto future hardware, which may well be very, very different. I do think something to sort of pick you up on there, Oliver. I think there's no guarantee at the moment that it's either an AMD box or not an AMD box. We just don't really know at this point, but the groundwork is being laid for something that could be very different. We just don't really know at the moment.
Yeah, certainly, just looking at what they're kind of saying here, looking at what they've been saying and what Phil's been hinting at, because Phil does tend to hint a lot. It does sort of...
Well, to be fair, he doesn't really hint. It's happening. When he's hinting, he's saying it because it's going to happen.
Yeah. So, one obvious way to achieve the biggest generational leap in Xbox history would be to put a 5090 in there or something, right? That's the obvious.
That'd be sick.
Yeah.
It's called the PC.
In one SKU, in one of 100 SKUs or something, there's a super high-end console. And I think it definitely is the kind of thing that does hint towards a more varied hardware platform, at least. And hopefully they'll bring back some of these game enhancements, because I remember they were talking about doing 4K 60 with Gears of War. They were talking about doing more discrete game enhancements. And we did see some of that for Xbox Series, but not all of it. And I'd certainly like to see more work being done with that, because that was really interesting. And as far as I'm concerned, on the 360 side, there's a ton of games that are available. On the original Xbox side, it's much more limited. I think it's a library of 20 games, or it's a very limited library of games.
Yeah.
It's not all
primarily licensing issues.
Licensing issues are obviously a huge problem, but I would like to see, if possible, just a little bit more titles brought forward from that console, if licensing issues could be sorted out.
Yeah, the announcement, it wasn't really even an announcement. It was an internal email from Sarah Bond that was leaked and then confirmed by Microsoft. It's very vague, really. You can read a lot into it. And it all comes down to what is the makeup of this next generation machine going to be. But also, I suspect we're probably going to learn a lot more about the handheld a lot sooner, which may well lay the groundwork for, the architecture of the later machines and how they're going to handle this transition, because it does sound quite profound. Phil does seem to really want to be able to turn his Legion Go into an Xbox, doesn't he?
Yeah. I'm actually so excited for this. I was just thinking about it. I woke up this morning. I was like, God, I'm getting kind of when I was looking at the sheet, I was kind of getting that vibe of the Xbox 360, difference. You were just looking at such a much more powerful machine, maybe a lot more features, bringing in, I remember the media center capabilities of the Xbox 360 being a big touting thing at the time, kind of dovetailing in with Windows XP Media Center Edition. There's all these things that I'm just I'm hoping for the new Xbox strategy to really tie in PC. And this, if it is a more generalized emulation route instead of doing what they did in the past, it can be very interesting, because it could also mean not just backwards compatibility for future Xbox consoles. It could also mean backwards compatibility for Windows. Something that I've really wanted for a long time was the ability to play an Xbox 360 game that never got a port on Windows officially through Windows devices, instead of having to rely on community emulators, which don't have full coverage, which are, you're wholly reliant upon years of outside research looking in, instead of the people who made the box can maybe make an emulator. I think that would be my nth degree goal for all of this as a PC player, but we'll see what this means.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're quite right. When you look back to OG Xbox and Xbox 360, those were two consoles which were, ahead of their time, and they were bringing new features to the forefront, and we kind of got, well, basically we sort of moved into a period of multi-platform development that basically necessitated AMD hardware, and it necessitated AMD hardware to a set budget, and we kind of had an uninspiring box in the form of Xbox One, a pretty incredible one with Xbox One X, and decent hardware with Series S/X. But at the same time, I see exactly where you're coming from, Alex, because that 360 was ahead of PC in many regards, and that's kind of been sort of left by the wayside, and it's to the point now where we're sort of looking at the next generation Xbox as being sort of as good as what PC is doing now in terms of NVIDIA features, when arguably with Microsoft steering the DirectX APIs and whatnot, you'd want them to be almost a step ahead of that.
You're way ahead of that. That's the thing, because like DX12 Ultimate was the thing that brought parity of Xbox features to the PC. But NVIDIA was already there like 2 years before release, like with the X12 Ultimate, Turing's DX12 Ultimate. So I would like to see whatever the next box is to pioneer new aspects of DX that we just don't see. And I think that's a great opportunity.
Yeah.
Something I want to pick up from previous direct discussions concerns this concept of third-party markets appearing on Xbox, and a reasonable sort of rebuttal to our contention that we're talking about essentially Windows compatibility to make that possible. Somebody just said, well, maybe it is just third-party stores appearing on Xbox, and it would be an alternative place to buy Xbox conversions of games. What do you think about that, Oliver?
Oh, that's
Doesn't
pretty
quite
uninteresting.
make sense to me.
Yeah,
What
is that?
Yeah, I don't know necessarily why you'd proactively bring in third parties to sell existing Xbox software, because it doesn't do anything for you. I can understand if compelled by court order, but I don't know. As a platform holder, you're bringing in
sooner or later that could happen.
Right, sooner or later that could happen, but I wouldn't expect Microsoft to be trying to explore that approach proactively. I'd expect some judge from the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals saying, "Okay, you have to do this." Sorry,
what if it's a dark horse? A dark horse to make Sony's hand, how do you force the hand? We're going to do it. We're going to sync our own box to sync yours. I have no idea.
Yeah, but
I don't think I don't think it would sync the box.
I
That's
know.
I think it would basically allow it would basically become the one box that plays them all.
Yeah,
essentially, right?
If you're gonna like tear that much of a hole in your whole licensing arrangement for your consoles, the whole Blades and Razors model, I think you'd do it for a bigger ask than just like EGS can sell you a copy of the new Call of Duty. I think that's personally my read on it, but I could be wrong. But I would hope certainly that it involves something much deeper on a technical level that is actually delivering new and interesting software instead of just more interesting deals. That's my own personal perspective.
Absolutely. I don't think we've got too much more to say about this, except obviously it's intriguing. We'd like to know more. We know there's going to be some kind of hardware announcement during the end of the year. Still think it's probably going to be handheld first, but even so, just the opportunity to get some sort of visibility on what those handheld plans are and the extent to which it sort of dovetails with PC, I think that's quite an interesting thing to look forward to.